Community Treasure Series. Isn't it nice to be back? We missed these during COVID for 2 years, and we've had, this is our third one, second one, third one, whatever it is. But it's a lot of fun. We want to welcome everybody online who's joining us via Facebook Live. We're thrilled that you're with us. And don't forget, you can comment online and in your comments, and they will, the questions or comments will come right up here to the stage to Alex, and during that Q&A portion, we'll be able to take care of that. Before we get started, want to tell you, of course, about a few events that are coming up. First of all, tomorrow night, the Strand Lecture Series. We have a 4-part lecture series that we do every year. This year's lecture series is called Understanding Government. And the first lecture was by Steve Horton, Board Services Director of Indiana School Boards Association. Tomorrow's lecture is by Luke Britt. He is called the Public Access Counselor for the state of Indiana. You might have heard of something called open door laws. And these are the laws that govern all of us elected people on what we do publicly, and so that there's no backroom stuff. Well, he's kind of the guy that adjudicates that and manages that. And that'll be a really interesting discussion. Then we're going to have, later in the year, we'll have the Purdue School of Agriculture send their economic team down, and they are going to, their economists will talk about taxation in Shelby County and drilling down in what we pay in taxes and how it rates to the rest of the state and state projected revenues. That's kind of an interesting thing. And then the last lecture in the series will be Brian Asher, who is with Shelby County Economic Development Corporation, and he will talk about how we go about getting factories or people to locate into our county. People say, oh, well, you see this announcement that Poet came and built an ethanol plant. People don't realize it takes decades to do that and all the steps. And I do believe he is going to have a site locator. Those are the people who go across the country looking for places for their factories or businesses with him, and that'll be the last in that series. So that'll be a lot of fun. Next week on this stage, on Thursday night, we have something we love, and that's giving young musicians a chance to play on our stage, and that will be the Shelbyville Middle School Jazz Band, a jazz choir. After a 2-year hiatus, they are back, and it's going to be great to hear these kids get their jazz chops. It's free of charge, 7 p.m. Come on out on, I do believe that's Tuesday the 17th, maybe it's Thursday the 17th, whatever it is. So that'll be a lot of fun. We do have a regular Friday Night Frights film series. For those of you who are not familiar with the Strand or with our history, we were a movie theater from 1916 in the time we reopened as a performing arts center in 2008. And just because we do cool live things on this stage now doesn't mean we stray far from where we were. And on Friday late weekend nights always meant B-rate horror flicks here at the Strand. Everybody sat in the balcony and did things we weren't supposed to do. And we keep up that tradition with Friday Night Frights. The June 3rd Friday Night Frights is the 1955 film Tarantula, which is the very first film of Clint Eastwood. That's going to be a lot of fun, so I know we have some people in the audience that will make sure they're here for that. And then we go on out through the year. We have a lot of fun things coming up in June, middle of June. We have a group called Rusty Ship. They're kind of a rock band. They'll be on stage. The 38th Infantry Army Band for the state of Indiana, their concert band, will be performing here on June 28th. They're only doing 4 concerts in 2022, and we are one of the 4, so we're very pleased with that. They're a fantastic military group, and all sorts of other things. So you can see our website, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, or call us, text us, wave us down on the side of the street or whatever, and we're happy to tell you all about the Strand. Previous to, you might have seen me walking around here, I was giving a couple people a tour, and we have our little chunks of stage. These were from our old vaudevillian stage, which was just right behind me, that we took out. That was our COVID project. And we do have those at the concession stand, and Steve Frazee, laser-etched Strand Theater, original vaudeville stage, 1916 to 2020. When we took it out, and we have those if anyone wants a souvenir of the Strand. So anyway, enough of what I have to say. Let's get into the public square. We did this first pre-pandemic, pre-renovation So now we are post-pandemic, let's hope, and post-renovation of the public square. So we're very pleased to welcome to this stage our partner in Community Treasure Series from the Grover Center, Alex Craw. Thank you very much for supporting the Strand.
So yeah, as I'm not supposed to walk around, we're gonna do our. I'm allowed to walk a little bit, so I'm gonna do my best here. Yeah. So as David was saying, we had done a talk about the public square previously. We focused more on sort of a timeline of the public square, what was going on, in different eras, different decades, things like that. This one, I thought it would be more beneficial to talk a little bit about how our public square, while the experiences on them are unique, we come from a longer tradition of public spaces, right? And I'll root each of those public spaces that I'll be talking about with what elements we borrowed within our own public square throughout its 200-year course. Okay, there's a guy, T.S. Eliot, you know, the writer. He wrote this really interesting essay that focused on tradition versus the individual talent. And basically, it's a long-winded essay, and it says a lot. But the thing that we really need to focus on is that in the grand scheme of things, when we have this really large tradition of whatever it might be, it could be a science, it could be literary tradition in T.S. Eliot's case, the individual only can contribute to it, and the only way to effectively add on to that is to understand the past that came before. And so how do we manipulate a space like the public square or writing like T.S. Eliot was proposing, is that we have this understanding of our past. And being from a historical society, we like to know a little bit about that past. We kind of think that that's the way to go. So that's how I'm going to be talking about this tonight. Like I said, there'll be a lot of different words I'll throw around. A rose by any other name could be as sweet. It's still going to be, at the heart, public square. All right? That's what we're going to be focusing on. So the first one, the very first public space that we ever had was the Agora. And it was started in 500 BC in Greece. So 2,500 years ago. And the Agora was really interesting. The big thing that we want to focus in that they did was they set up these communal spaces. They were not square in shape, but they set up these communal spaces that people could engage with each other. They could share their political discourse with each other. They could meet, have meetings, things like that. This is really the start of what we would call a public square. The other thing that they added into it that they thought was really central and pretty important was a central drinking spot, a fountain, right? And so fountains used to be a little bit more utilitarian than they were a design feature. It's where we got all of the water from. So they introduced that concept. They put it in a central location so people had access to it. Now, obviously, we'll be talking a little bit about the fountain here. So let me get through here. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about, like I said, they had political discourse. Politicians would show up to their agora, and the public was encouraged to engage with those individuals. They could question them. They could push back on them. It was a healthy sign of democracy to be able to get into these kind of arguments. That was a good thing. And so what we see here in our translation of the public square, this is the raising of the boss pool. It's one of the earliest photographs we have of public square. Anybody familiar with the raising of the boss pool? Anybody here? So the raising of the boss pool was a political thing, sort of a political stunt with Samuel Tilden and Thomas Hendricks, vice president from Shelbyville, and Rutherford Hayes and William Wheeler. The idea here was that the two political parties would erect a pool, and whoever had the larger of the two pools was the better one, I guess. It was sort of this thing that they did this back and forth. And so, as you can see here, so this is them erecting the boss pool. And this one here is the Samuel Tilden Thomas Hendricks one, which is much larger than the competitor there. So, earliest photo, this is back in the 1870s that we have on the square. The next one that you can see here is going to be about the fountain. Like I said, Agora introduces the concept of having a central drinking well, Now, this was by the 1900s, no longer something that people were drinking out of. Thank goodness. The 1800s were a really bad period, especially in Europe. People were drinking out of the fountains a lot, and disease was rampant. In fact, I think it was Napoleon that introduced 2 waterways, one for healthy drinking water and one for fountain water. Like, please stop drinking the fountain water. It's not a good thing. It's how we get massive disease outbreaks. So, this is our fountain here. This is the Julius Joseph Fountain. Named after a guy named Julius Joseph, obviously. He was a German immigrant. He came to the United States, and when he moved to Shelbyville, him and his brother started a clothing company, or clothing store rather, a men's clothing store here. So it is on East Washington, that first building right there. And you'll notice that it's a little bit taller than it is now. That's because a fire took out the 3rd floor that you see there. But Julius Joseph, him and his brother started this company and did really well for themselves. So well that they were able to invest in the big boom of Shelbyville at this time, the furniture industry. He started with the Hodel Furniture Company, eventually taking it over and becoming president. When he passed away, he was able to bequeath to the city $5,000, and in that, they built the fountain. So I want to read from George Honig, who was the man who designed the fountain, the reason that the fountain looks the way it does. He said, "The group at the top of the fountain expresses something of the life and character of Mr. Julius Joseph. He enjoyed games, hunting, and fishing, and Boy Scout recreations. These little figures in the group are symbols of these various phases. The ball, bat, and the boy typify games. The little girl with the flowers in her arm expresses the joy of outdoor life. The little Boy Scout with the fish signifies the joy of hunting and fishing, while the running water expresses the youth of life. All the figures of the curious group are symbols of ideals. These things will appeal to the children of the community, stimulate their imagination, and cause them to have better and bigger ideals for their future life. This is the real object and purpose of this scheme, to be of benefit to the children." He went on to say, "What we are trying to do here is to appeal to the youth of the community through this fountain, with the idea that the boy of today will be the man of tomorrow. It is a message we are bringing to the children through Mr. Joseph and the things for which he stood." So here are some of the images of the fountain. So this is after it was installed in 1923. Here we have some various kind of him carving out the clay over here. That's what's going on, setting it up. That's after it was installed, and here's a different angle. And you'll notice at the bottom, there are some plaques. The original design had these plaques installed on them. Kind of a terrifying thing here. They all were symbolic as well, just like the top of the design had a meaning. So did the plaques on the bottom. These 3 here, and I believe this one here, are meant to represent the 4 seasons. But then why are there 2 more? Well, the 2 that he added here were supposed to be the mid-seasons, the seasons in between. And the child that really looks horrifying is supposed to be between spring and winter. It doesn't know whether it wants to be spring or it wants to be winter. And so that's what these ones are here. This one is at the museum and is currently on display. If you wanted to learn more about Public Square, it'd be a good time to come in and check it out. All right. After the Agora, the Roman Forum comes into play. And like most things in Rome, they were heavily borrowing from what the Greeks were already doing. And so the Forum really takes a lot of the things that were already going on in the Agora and maybe amplifies them a bit. Now, this is the first time that we're starting to see a rectangular sort of design. It is a 2-to-3 proportion. Our square itself is also more rectangular in design. If you were to measure it, it's actually more rectangular than it is square. The big thing that that the Forum introduces to the concept is, while it is an enclosed space and the roads kind of venture into it, they want to really make sure that shopping for the local population is put at a forefront. And so they start introducing boulders to the different roadways that enter into the forums themselves. Anybody have a guess on why they would put a boulder in these roadways? Anyone? It's one of the big implementations that they wanted to do with our downtown here. Pedestrians, right? They want to make sure that the pedestrians are safe so that vehicles cannot get into that space and run them over. So that's why they introduced boulders to the different forums in Rome. On our end of things, you'll see that the same thing's happening with the forum as with the agora. Political discourse is number one. They actually use the temples in that space as both a place to have their political discourse as well as to worship their deities. So here in Shelbyville, move this over here. Our courthouse was built in the 1830s, finished in the 1830s. I don't know, how many of you knew that Shelbyville's public square once had a courthouse on, or didn't know? Did anybody not know that Shelbyville's public square? Yeah, so the original design was platted with the idea that they were going to put a courthouse in the center of the public square. The thing about our downtown is it was incredibly swampy. If you were to go back in time to that time period, and I talked about this a little last month, but for those that weren't there, I can kind of give you an update. This was an incredibly swampy area. After the glacier came through and leveled all of the land, the water really had nowhere to go, right? It's a flat kind of space. And so what would happen is they needed a place to settle. The three people that made Shelbyville possible donated this land off. The public square where it was located was most likely a clearing spot, and so they centered that as the center of the town, and this was being constructed. It took them over a decade to get it constructed, however, and part of the reason was because the courthouse weighed more than they anticipated, and it was sinking rapidly into the swamp area that was our downtown. So by the time that they finally get this finished, one, they've already outgrown the space, but two, it's going down. And so what they do is they start deconstructing this by the 1850s, and they use those bricks to build the Ray Hotel. The next iteration that we have of the square is the medieval square. And the big thing with the medieval square, the reason it was set up the way it was churches and castles were central to that life, right? And so what they would do is people started kind of gathering in those spots. Towns formed out of that. And as they did this, they needed a way to fortify and protect themselves. And so walls were built around that space. Building walls around a space, though, limits how much space you can actually use. And so these tight areas could not keep on developing more shops, more buildings for shops. And so the medieval square became a market square. This is where anybody could come and gather, sell their goods off, and they wouldn't be sacrificing even more space. So these became public areas for them to gather in. In Shelbyville's case, let's see if I have this one up here. This is, didn't show you this one. This is inside the Ray Hotel in their lobby, which was up a flight of steps on the first floor, not on the ground floor. All right, so I said about the marketplace with the medieval square, and that became central to their design. Our marketplace, again, wasn't developed until the 1830s, and it was located right here on Public Square. We're going to be seeing this image a few more times. I'm going to be talking about this and why it's set up the way it is. But our courthouse, when it was finished, was here. The jail slightly off to one side, and then down here is where the marketplace was. After the medieval square became the Renaissance Plaza. As I said earlier, there's going to be a lot of names thrown around: plaza, square, agora, forum. All of this means the same thing. It's a public space for which the community can gather. The first thing that I really wanted to talk about was the introduction of residential spaces. Renaissance squares introduced sort of a privatization of a public space. They allowed people to stay on it, and in some cases restrict access to the central gardens. Of course, we never restricted access to our central space with our public square, but residential dwellings were added to the top portion of these buildings downtown. The other thing that is important with the Renaissance Square is the sheer amount of Italianate structures that we have in our downtown. Italianate stylization is an attempt to capture that Renaissance architecture, all right? And while it's not quite the same, the Italianate that we have here in Indiana, which is like the most prominent, if you drive all around Indiana, it's the most prominent type of architecture that you're going to see. While it is supposed to capture that Renaissance, when it came to the United States, it was very uniquely American. I'm going to show you some photos of the public square and the different Italianate structures on it. So here, this would be Capone's now. Gives you kind of your bearings. And you can see this entire block is all Italianate. All right, this building here is also Italianate. And this no longer stands. This is where the Methodist building is now. Next one here is this building. And this is right here is West Washington. I'm sorry, no, North Harrison. This is Capone's, and this is just a different angle to take the same thing. Notice in the downtown with the inner urban cutting through. On this side, we are looking towards West Washington here. Again, Italianate here, 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 and here. This was also an Italianate building. It's obviously no longer standing. Once again, these two are Italianate, as is this one here. If you notice, and this is something that we talk a lot about in our exhibit, this building is still standing, but it looks a little bit different than it did back then. It no longer has that third floor. Once again, there's a lot of outside forces that sometimes require us to force changes on the public square. Sometimes it's something that we willingly want to adapt, change, we want it to look a different way. But sometimes disaster is what spurs that change along. Our square has probably caught fire. I'd have to look at the exhibit, something like 20 times. It's an astronomical number how many times it had caught fire. And so much so that eventually the city had to put an ordinance out saying, like, no more buildings out of wood. Like, it's just causing everything to go up in flames. This wasn't a fire that took this one out. This was actually a tornado that touched down on the top of it, skipped, and where the Ray Hotel was, that building that was right beside it landed right on top of it as well and took it out. And so that's why this changed. Again, this is the same angle that we just saw, just a little bit more of a clear picture. This is where the bank's at. This is now, I think, Cadillac Jack's. The Depre building, as well as the Oddfellows Lodge building here, are both good examples of Italianate. This was also an Italianate structure as well. Another angle, same thing. And that's a bit of a spoiler for what's to come. All right. The next thing that got introduced after the Renaissance Square or Plaza is the Puritan Square and the Spanish Plaza. This is when they jump over to the United States, and they really are trying to develop a sense of place. It's incredibly isolating to take that jump across the ocean, and so they set up specific spots that encouraged community members to come together. You know, if you're living out in the wilderness, you have to have a reason to come to town, and this was a good one. This is where community engagement would happen. It's where, once again, a market would be set up. One of the first things they would typically build is a tavern. Shelbyville, the very first building that it installed on Public Square, was a tavern right here on like lot 10. This is where they would do anything from politics to gathering to talk about what kind of changes they wanted to make into their downtown, that kind of stuff. So they introduced that. They also come to this place to celebrate, to whatever it might be, a harvest, a big event. And this is what we see on our public square quite often. a lot of celebrations. Here we have I think this is the Veterans Parade going on. This would be I think this is 1902. This is in 1910. This is the Knights of Pythias, their anniversary. You're looking down West Washington here. This is during a Liberty Drive for World War I. You can see how the community is gathered here, and we have a few images of this one, but this is North Harrison here, and you can kind of see how the track wraps around. This is the raising of the flag for that Liberty Drive. And this is in 1927. It's really hard to see. This kind of looks like just a bunch of like a bush on here. These are all people gathered around the central portion of the square. This is another parade going on. I think this one jumps back to I think this is in 1902 as well. All right, and I just mentioned that the tavern was one of the first things built. In Shelbyville, the reason that the tavern was built, it actually predates, like I said, the courthouse doesn't get built until, I think it was 1832 is when it finally opened. That means the city people needed a place to meet, the county commissioners needed a place to gather, laws needed to be passed, ordinances needed to be passed. And so that tavern, which was done by Benjamin Williams here, was the place that people gathered in. In the early years, they would actually allow an allotment of alcohol to be drank during those meetings that was funded by the community members. So really easy. It greased up the wheels, I think, for those early laws to get passed. But that was, like I said, at lot number 10. Finally, the big thing that you're going to see across frontier America is going to be the Penn grid, the Penn square, which is exactly what you're seeing right here. This is the Penn grid to a T. When William Penn came to the United States, he had a couple goals in mind. One, yes, it was definitely to have the freedom to worship how they saw fit. So when he comes to set up Philadelphia, that was one of the big things that was on his mind. But the other thing that was on his mind that he had been growing up through and experiencing was rampant disease in Europe, plagues, things like that, and fires, massive fires. Fires so large that they took out all of London. When that fire happened, all of the people were forced into a green space, Moorfield, to escape that fire. William Penn saw at that young age that this was that green spaces were safe spaces. And so when he came to the United States, he decided that one of the things that they were going to implement was enough area that people could have a house on a fixed lot. In the center of it, they'd have enough room for an orchard. They'd have enough room for a garden. That's even the smallest lots that they would be set up that way. He wanted to eliminate confusion. Up to this point, there was no grid system that had taken place. Towns and cities were sort of developed haphazardly. And so he developed a grid system to the point that even the water had to flow according to a grid. That's how precise he wanted it to be. This system was highly successful in planning towns and cities. It wasn't so much in creating the utopia that he hoped for. If you've ever been to Philadelphia, that was not a reality that came into fruition. People don't have an acre of land in which they can have a garden and an orchard. But the idea lived on. The square portion as well was introduced into this grid design. He realized that while an acre of land is great and all, having an extra park, I guess you could say, as a place for people to commune, gather, was also really important for the experience of living in a city. He wanted to bring country living and city living together in this unique kind of utopian experience. That didn't really happen. In fact, for the first 100 or so years, Philadelphia, I believe, only has 2 public squares that are open. As this travels west, though, as this goes through frontier America, that square design becomes integral to the community itself. One, yes, it's great for gathering. It's great for people. It's for all the reasons I've already named, marketplace, all that fun stuff, but also it was a place that as you were bringing your animals through, they had a place to publicly graze, right? That didn't spell out really great for Shelbyville. So the second building built in this public square here beside Benjamin Williams Tavern was a pound. So they could gather up all of the hogs that had been making a pretty big mess of the downtown. Turns out if you put hogs that like to root in a swamp, it doesn't spell out anything but disaster. That money, though, that people had to pay, the residents had to pay to get their animals back out of the pound, went directly into building the courthouse. So I don't know if it was so much that it was sinking so fast, or if maybe there wasn't as many animals as we are led to believe through the history books. The last portion of public squares is going to be the square and modernism. This is the idea that form follows function, right? And a big thing, this is a really popular trend as we hit into the 1900s. What kind of things are being introduced in the 1900s that we couldn't have prepared for prior to this? Cars, exactly. Automobiles, transportation. This was a big thing that nobody had prepared for. The cool thing about the Penn Square itself was that William Penn had proposed that all of the roads be very wide. Like, we wouldn't consider it very wide today, but by the standards of how roads were laid out prior to this, it was a pretty significant size of a road. When you look at our downtown, how the spaces, and I can't remember the exact measurements, but we read this and we think, wow, they must have had some really crazy foresight, and it was just a part of the Penn grid. That was just how he had suggested that it be laid out. On our end, it worked out really well because when cars were introduced, we had a little bit more room to expand into, okay? So cars, and the other thing is going to be the inner urban, and it changes how we engage with this space downtown. Up until this point, trains really weren't allowed to go over 5 miles an hour. That was a city ordinance that they had. It's kind of a weird city ordinance, but they didn't want anybody to get run over, so 5 miles an hour was the limit. When the inner urban gets introduced, it's not setting the tracks on fire with its speed, but it's significantly faster than 5 miles an hour, and that ordinance got knocked out. So now we have, the traffic through the center portion. Up to this point, our public square had been sort of a catch-all. You could kind of go whichever way you wanted. There wasn't really any rules, have at it. When the inner urban forces this center portion through, traffic also starts following that pattern as well. The photo that you see here is the last running of the inner urban in 1930, I think 31. The reason that it was captured was not because it was the last running of the inner urban, but rather that there was a giant fire going on over here. Remember I said fires are like the square's worst enemy. This is when they took it out in 1934. This is the inner urban track being removed. Pieces of that you can still see at Morrison Park. Ditto on this side as well. And then this is the upper portion. This is looking at the public square. This would be in 1946. This is just before they introduce the circle design to our public square. So you can still see that traffic's allowed to go through the center portion. At the end of the 1940s, it then follows the circle, which I think is an interesting thing. We tend to use words that describe how we use space. We start calling this the circle because we start migrating away from it via traffic. We no longer are using it as a public square at this point. Okay. One of the things that I wanted to end on, and you notice I kind of went through this pretty quickly tonight. I really want to give you guys the opportunity to talk about some of your experiences on public square. The last time we did this, I just kind of went on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And I didn't give enough opportunity for you guys to talk about how you've engaged with that space. And I think that's a really important part of especially these kinds of discussions, these kinds of conversations. I'm happy to answer questions, of course, but I want to hear from you. My ending note is I wanted to talk about this one researcher. He was looking at the rules of public squares, and he asked, in his research paper whether squares were a vital organ in the city or a thing of the past. And he concluded with the following: "It is the spaces which we inhabit and experience and the activities that there take place that should sustain man's connection to a place, since they are undoubtedly a primary need for any individual. People's interactions with the place, individually or as a group, encompass both their connection with the historical, sociocultural, economic, and political dimensions, and the symbolic spectrum of their connection to the universe. In this context, there are no doubts as to the importance of urban squares' role in bolstering the city's social cohesion, and as such, the quality of life for all the citizens." All right, and then real quick, we'll go through a couple of these this last image, I guess, is them reinstalling in 1981 the fountain after it was removed from the square. They reinstalled it and put it back together. We, of course, have a different iteration of that. And the reason I wanted to point to this one is that no matter what happens to the square, how I began this was, it's a canvas. It meets the needs of the community. It has to evolve over time. If it stayed one way, we would be in a swamp right now in 1822 and watching a courthouse sink to the dregs, you know? So this is them, once again, changing that up after that had been removed previously, circle pattern before it, being updated and changed. Suggests that the public will always be the thing that interacts with that space and evolves it over time. Now, I wanted to throw it to you guys. Questions, first of all, I guess, and I'll try to do my best on answering them, or memories that you want to share with that public square.
Okay, hold on. That's so all our,
Thank you, Dave.
take a step back, Alex, into the light. Good.
Into the light.
Okay.
Alex, I have a question regarding the legendary tunnels
Yeah.
that supposedly are under the square or led to the square, the center of it. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so it's not so much a legend. They're not many of them are open anymore. They've been bricked up, bricked over, kind of cut out. So two things, that there's some that are thought to be tunnels, but they weren't tunnels. They were coal chutes that allowed coal to be put into the basement so that it could be shoveled into the furnace. So that's sometimes like we think that there's, like it gets labeled as a tunnel, but it's actually not. Now there was a tunnel that went around the center portion of the square. My understanding was, one, it allowed deliveries to take place between the different stores, the different establishments, free of any of the excess dust and the rest of the kind of stuff that went with having horses up kind of roaming around on the public square. I don't know if that gives you a satisfactory answer, but that's what it was. And in fact, if you go on Grover's Facebook page and you look up the images of the Blessing Opera House as they were going over the renovation, we were able to get into the basement as well there. And there's one set of photos that you can see they used cylinder blocks to brick up the tunnel, but you can kind of see where the tunnel would have been there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember as a kid going underneath the J.G. Depries
Uh-huh.
and going all the way over to underneath the First Merchants Bank.
No kidding.
Yes, it used to be open back then. Yes.
Was it in use then, or was it kind of like something that you could explore in your...
Oh, I was a little bitty kid, probably 7, 8, 10 years old. And yeah, you could just explore. Yeah, I mean, the door, you just swung it open and take off. Yeah,
Huh.
yeah.
And as long as we're talking about tunnels, right beneath my feet is the Strand Theater's tunnel. And, yep, it's right here under my feet, and you can crawl in it today.
And if you don't want that scary claustrophobic feeling, because it is a tiny tunnel, you can go onto the Grover Museum Facebook page. I think it's on the Strands as well. And we took some photos of this whole thing when it was going under renovation as well. And you can explore that tunnel yourself without having to crawl in it.
Do you have any literature on the fort above where the dress shop is now?
I can tell you about it.
Go for it.
Sure. Yeah, so the Alhambra was built by a guy named Frank Rembush. He's one of my top 5 favorite people in Shelbyville history books. You know, like when people say, like, when you're that rich, you're not crazy, you're eccentric. That's like Frank Rembush to a T. I was once told that Frank Rembush had bought the Mad King of Bulgaria's robes, and I just thought it was like an anecdotal type of story that it was just like using as a symbol of how crazy this man is. And it turns out it was true. I got recently some photos from a donor, or a set of newspapers from a donor, and his wife is posed in the Mad King of Bulgaria's robes. Why did he buy them? I have no idea. He was a pretty eccentric individual, but really ahead of his time as well. And so Frank Rembush, he goes out with Enos Porter to Connorsville to learn the craft of making mirrors, okay? And he comes back to Shelbyville. His dad has a purchasing stake in the Crystal Theater, which was on Public Square, where Bishop's is now, was where the Crystal was. He sees that this is going to be big, you know, like the Crystal Theater wasn't really set up to do theater type of, to show movies or anything like that. It was, in the day, a store. At night, they kind of tore everything out and made it a theater. And he says, like, this is going to be a pretty big thing. So he decides that he's going to build the first theater here in Shelbyville, like, solely dedicated to the idea of showing film. That's the Alhambra building that you see over there with the cupola at the top of it. And the way that he does it, it's really unique. The space, as you notice, is not quite as long as the Strand is. And he uses his knowledge in mirror making to also develop screens. So this is the other part of his business. It's not just that he has movie theaters, but he also develops screens. And two of the screens that really take off, the first one is a silk mirror screen, which uses ground bits of the glass, basically. It creates a really sharp contrast with black and white films. The idea of see it on a silver screen, right? That's where you're kind of getting that idea. The other one that he introduces is, and I think is way cooler, is called the reverse mirror screen. And it doesn't really take off as much, but it's a hefty piece of technology. Basically, you can project from the reverse side of the screen, and using mirrors, it flips the image to the front. And it allows them to use significantly less space than what would be regularly required for a projector. He takes off. The Alhambra is his first theater. It's incredibly popular. It does very well. His business also takes off, and he's able to start picking up and purchasing more movie theaters and building more movie theaters across Indiana and Illinois. One of my favorite stories about him is in regards to the Crump Theater, and he, in the 1920s, he wants to show movies on Sunday. And Columbus's laws were really strict at that time. They didn't really love movies to be shown. They didn't love business happening on a Sunday. Frank Rembush really took problem with this because out of his like 36 movie theaters that he owned, this was the only one that he was not allowed to show movies on a Sunday. And so what he does is he says, you know what, I'm just going to do it. What are they going to do? And what they did was they arrested him. And he said, what's the deal? Why'd you arrest me? And they said, well, you can't do business on the Sabbath. You can't do that. And he said, oh, okay. So the next week he hired a Jewish man up in Indianapolis and said, can you show a movie on a Sunday? And he said, sure I can. And so they arrested that man. And he said, what are you doing? He said, you can't show a movie on a Sunday or a Sabbath. And he said, his Sabbath isn't on Sunday. He said, that's a loophole and you know it, Frank. Like, that's not going to fly here. And so he does it one more time, gets arrested, and the judge says, if you do this again, I'm shutting you down permanently, and you're going to jail for a very long time. He says, all right. A few years pass, and the talkies come out. And he really does feel like he's missing significant business here. And so he says, really at the heart of this problem is that I'm taking money from people on Sunday. But if you just came in and watched a movie and happened to want to leave a donation in a box or whatever, I'm sure that that's fine. And he did this for about a month. And they couldn't do anything because he wasn't conducting business. And pretty soon, the people that were attending the churches that had been filing against him started realizing, hey, seeing a movie on a Sunday is kind of nice. Having that option's pretty cool. I like that. And so when he went before the judge said, look, we're going to allow you to do it. You can't show it during church service hours, but you could do it in between those. And if you ever go outside of that, if you ever step outside of that, it's going to be the same deal that we did with a few years with you. You'll be arrested. I'll shut you down permanently. And for the duration of his life, my understanding was he followed that to a T. As far as the cupola at the top, what was it used for? Mr. Rembush was also really into music. His whole family, the Rembush family, prior to being known for the movie industry, was known for their musical prowess in both making and performing, so making instruments and performing. And so he wanted to have an area that would attract people to his theater. He believed in the power of music, and he set that cupola up so that it could project the music into the night, and that's what it was built for there.
Just as a aside, one of the screens that Alex talked about, the Strand still had our original 1916 screen, and it's on the third floor way up there. We still have it, and it's one of the Rembush screens, which is kind of cool. So, you know, that history is still alive. Also, you'll notice our proscenium, or the arch, where that screen was, that's our original 1916 proscenium, and you'll notice the aspect ratio is 4:3, which is what the old silent films were. Nowadays, we have CinemaScope, which started in 1954, which is side to side. That's why we have these curved walls. And the screen that we have is the 4:3 aspect screen of Rembush, with you can feel the beads right on it. It's pretty cool.
Let's see, the organ at St. Joe Catholic Church, somehow or another, Mr. What's his name?
Rembush?
Rembush had some involvement in getting that thing put together. Do you know that story?
I know, so there was a Rembush, I think I know who you're talking about. There's a Frank Rembush, and then there's another gentleman, F.A., no. And I haven't been able to trace whether it's his brother. I think it's Luke or something like that. But yes, he used to perform on that organ as well. Not Frank Rembush, but one of his relatives, maybe one of his brothers.
That organ actually was given to St. Joe by Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie gave two things. They gave libraries and organs to Catholic churches. And in 1910, that was originally installed, and that's one of the original Carnegie organs still playing the same music that your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents listened to.
What were some of the early shops, stores around the circle when it first started?
Yeah, like the very first, like the original square, what was going on with that? So like I said, the very first one was going to be a tavern. That was Benjamin Williams. He installs the tavern almost immediately. It's like 1820. It was even before the square, the downtown got platted, he had his tavern open. Might not even had a liquor license yet, if I recall correctly. The second thing was the Pound. And Benjamin Williams, because it was built so close to his tavern, he was charged with also keeping watch over the Pound. So he was the first animal keeper. The third building, now you're going to test me. Well, I can give you, how about a hodgepodge of things that were constructed in that first decade. There's a couple more saloons and taverns that are built in that area, two of which, Benjamin Williams and another gentleman, bounce back and forth with the different commissioner meetings, court cases, things like that, where they're taking place. They both had a contract to be able to do that. Another predominant feature would be just people living there, right? Cabins, things like that. Ovid Butler, who Butler University, the namesake of Butler University, goes up there. He builds his cabin right here. And this is one of the first church gathering spots. Even though it's his cabin, people meet in the church, meet at his cabin as a church. This is where they meet there. So we've got we've got the tavern, we've got the pound, we've got Ovid Butler over here with his cabin. Interesting thing about Ovid Butler is his father-in-law is the one that platted this. His name's Abel Cool, and there was, I have to imagine, some tension in that family. Abel Cool platted it, and he was supposed to sell off the lots, and Ovid Butler ended up taking over from him. When he took over, he, sort of audited everything and found that there was a lot of money missing. And so he went to the commissioners and was like, hey, there's a lot of money missing. And I think Abel Cool didn't pay everything that he was supposed to. Abel Cool kind of rejected the idea. He was like, absolutely paid everything. And ultimately, I can't imagine that, Thanksgiving was one of the best times to be with that family. But so Ovid Butler was here. You have, I think the other tavern was over here. There is here is where the courthouse was built. Like I said, there's an offshoot here. Eventually that moves over here. The jail moves to this side of the square. There's a couple of livery stables in the area as well. So that's going to be predominantly what's going to be your earliest version of the square. The reason that they installed the marketplace and had market days was because you didn't really come to town to necessarily conduct business. The hogs that they had were largely for self-sufficiency. Pioneers at this point really only had as much as they needed. The other big thing, the other big industry is going to be over here, and that's going to be a mill, a grist mill, started by John Walker, one of the community's founders. Other than that, you've got a lot of nothing going on. I always tell people that even though this was the design in 1822, 1823, this was an idea. This was a dream, right? This is all blanketed forest. I talked about this a little bit last month. Forests were so so much larger than we could even imagine them being today. Trees were 30 feet in circumference, right? The poplar trees went 200 feet in the air. Last month I used the example that to match that size, you would have to stack the Methodist building 2.25 times on top of each other to reflect that size. So when we're talking about what was going on here, some of the early accounts that they say about, they have judges that are riding through the town. One of the accounts says that you wouldn't really know that it was a populated area, that save for a few cabins scattered amongst the trees, it was hard to tell how many people were even in the population. So that was the earliest version of the square. I know that's not a direct answer for you. Basically, places to drink, places to get locked up, places to impound your animals, and that was it. That was the earliest version, and places to live.
Alex, I've got one more here. Since that was a swampy area, do you know the approximate dates when the swamp was drained and the process used?
I don't know the approximate dates. I know that it was an issue the whole way through the 1800s. On where Bishop's is now, this portion here, there was so much standing water that it was a favorite spot for ducks to gather in. I know that they noted that for whatever reason in the early tellings of Shelbyville. That was there. I think it was there up into the 1860s. So how long did it? I would imagine when you look at the 1970 or 1876 photograph there of the raising of the Boss Pool, you don't really see too much of a swampy area. So maybe around then, but that's just a guess.
Well, we've had a really interesting conversation. Next Community Treasure Series will be on June 11th, and it will be rare. It will be on a Saturday at 2 p.m., and we're showing local films. These are films of Frank Gallows. Frank, many of you might have known Frank. He was a filmmaker for his entire life, and his films were saved. after he passed away, and they've been lovingly restored, so we've been told. And so we're going to have an afternoon of those films. And then July's Community Treasure Series will be an extension of that as well, and showing some of those films. So it'll be exciting. Those, I do believe, I'm pretty sure we'll be doing those on Facebook Live as well, because we don't have any copyright issues with that. Facebook might think otherwise, but we'll see how it turns out. Again, for this program and our audience, not only can you watch it live now, but these are archived, and you can watch them at any time. So years from now, you can come back and say, man, look at Alex. He didn't have any gray hair at that point in time. Of course, you couldn't tell because he didn't step into the light, but that's okay. Take a step back, Alex. Oh, thank you very much. So anyway, is there any final questions before we get going? Again, tomorrow night, 7 p.m., Luke Britt, public access counselor, and that's our Strand lecture series, Understanding Government. It's kind of odd that we had them in the same week. That's just the way it fell. If you have suggestions for this series for 2023, Alex and I are working on that to get 2023 all booked up. This year we did a short, abbreviated version, but next year we'll do a full series instead of just 6. So we're having a lot of fun, and we certainly appreciate the Grover Center. If you've not been to the museum recently, you need to go. It is a great place and lots of great things. Alex, tell us a little bit about what exhibits you have right now.
Yeah, well, the big one, largely going on with this discussion, is all about the public square. Evaluating public square examines a lot of what I was talking about tonight. What are the different components of our public square? How did they come into place? What businesses were in the earliest iterations of it? There's a huge timeline. When you said that, like, my brain instantly fried out because all I could see was about 200 years wrapping around a room. But the public square, it has a ton of photographs that highlight different scenes of the downtown, how the public engaged in that space. So that's in the Warble Gallery. Down the main drag, we've got Pushing Ink, which is an examination of the print journalism on a national level, but then also on our local level. It looks at the partisan era of press, the commercial era of press, and the professional era of press, how they all play with each other there, and how they migrate from one period to the next. And then, of course, the Streets of Old Shelby is always open. Presently, unfortunately, we have the train room down, but we'll be opening that hopefully either at the end of this month or the beginning of next, and it will be a totally new scene as far as the middle diorama goes. Our track was installed 35 years ago, and it turns out a lot of technologies happened between then and now. And so they're working steadily to get that all updated. Downstairs we have our Sister City exhibit, all about Shizuoka. And finally we have, in the Latshaw Gallery, images around Shelby County itself. In July, August, we'll be opening up a new exhibit called Building Shelby County, which is what our previous talk was about. This examines from the Wisconsin Glacier to the present day. How did the Wisconsin Glacier impact and kind of set the foundation for the agriculture and industry that was to come, that is Shelby County. And yeah, we're super excited about all of that. So if any of that gets you excited, come and see us. If it doesn't, I can promise you I can talk your ear off enough to make you excited about it, okay?
Well, let's give Alex a big round of applause. It was a wonderful lecture, and we look forward to seeing you again at the Strand. Thank you very much.